All right, greetings and welcome everyone to our monthly Azure Apps and Infrastructure community call. My name's Jeff Wagner, and today we're going to be talking about Citrix Cloud on Azure. I've got a few friends on the line, Jeff Mitchell from Microsoft, and Kevin is here from Citrix. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, we'll get started.
Hey, I'll go first. This is Jeff Mitchell. I work in Microsoft in the One Commercial Partner team as part of the Swarm. We work with partners to build solutions, and I've been working with Citrix and with Kevin.
Excellent, thanks, Jeff. And then Kevin Nardone. I am an enterprise architect with Citrix Consulting. I work with a handful of our enterprise accounts in the South Central region, but I've also done a lot of consulting work with our service provider and other virtualization teams.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Welcome. Glad that you're here talking about this exciting topic. So I'll get the question started. We've got a lot of questions here, that I have. First of all, what is this, Citrix Cloud on Azure? Is it a cloud on a cloud? Help me understand that. I don't get cloud on a cloud here.
Lots of clouds, and especially with all the wind and snow, I'm sure a lot of snowy, freezing clouds for a handful of people on the phone. But
right.
I'll clarify that a little bit, Jeff. Citrix Cloud is really, it's not a competitive product with Azure. It's not a separate cloud where we're hosting different types of infrastructure for like in an IaaS fashion. It really is more of a platform. We like to think of it as a management plane where you can operate and manage your Citrix services, whether it be our virtualization products like Zen Apps and Desktop, our mobility products, Zen Mobile, or some of our data sharing products. So from an Azure perspective, when a customer is looking towards you to leverage Azure for those virtual app and desktops, Citrix Cloud really provides a management plane for your team to really enhance and also expedite that process and migration to the cloud.
Okay, so what do you mean by a management plane? I know airplanes, I know other kinds of things. What's a management plane?
So pretty much think of it as like thinking, if you're familiar with the traditional versions of Zen Apps on Desktop on-premise, or
okay.
I'm building my server, I'm building my controller where I'm actually going to act as the admin and operate and work with my use cases, for instance. Deploy apps, deploy desktops, manage some of my images, create policies to really control that experience. We've taken those components of the technology, the pieces that I need to upgrade this database. The newest version came out. I need to go run through an upgrade. I need to maintain this database to have this whole infrastructure to provide this solution. We've taken those components and we've shifted them into a service. So now you can still provide that same remote delivery capability and centralization of apps and desktops utilizing virtualization technology without the overhead of having to manage those control pieces. So you always get the latest updates. You don't have to maintain that database anymore, the infrastructure that you're setting up from a server side. And it's also extensible in a way where it's a similar management experience across our other services as well. So really just think of it as that centralization of how you operate day-to-day as an admin into a web platform that you can now consume and then move faster and more agile with your users.
Interesting, very, very interesting. So why would I take, you mentioned IaaS, why would I take the Citrix Cloud approach versus an IaaS approach? That seems most comfortable for a lot of us.
Excellent. So some of the key differences, one is, again, upgrade cycles. We have a lot of customers in the Citrix world that are still working on 6.5, utilizing 2008 R2, and looking towards some of the newer versions of the product. And especially as organizations try to drive more from their IT resources, more and more technologies are getting pulled into the fold. You have security that you need to keep up with. You have changing business operations. Keeping up with that upgrade path can be difficult. So one of the greatest things about Citrix Cloud, by consuming the technology as a service, you're going to have the latest features. You're going to have the latest capabilities as we continue to innovate with Microsoft along the lines of Windows 10, Server 2016, new capabilities in our delivery mechanisms. You're going to get access to that. I know you're going to be able to consume that without having to go through that upgrade cycle. Another piece is also extensibility. One of the great things about Citrix Cloud is since we're just more of a management plane, your workloads exist securely and safely within your Azure subscription that you control. And the way we do that is through a series of connectors. So we bridge pretty much your resources into our management plane so you can control them and operate them, even though they're still running in your Azure subscription. So from an extensibility standpoint, you can do that and also in a hybrid fashion. So for instance, I can operate, my workloads on premise as you're shifting and helping customers migrate to the cloud. You can manage those workloads on premise and within Azure, all from a central point of management. So I'd say those are two of the primary benefits, and it's also driving down the complexity of trying to do a multi-site architecture if you're working with the standard IaaS capabilities.
Okay.
I think you get the.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that's the great summation of instead of an IaaS having to run a delivery controller storefront for multiple different resource locations, you let Citrix Cloud be the front end for that, right, and for the management layer. And you've got less IaaS resources inside of Azure that you have to manage.
Okay, I'm connecting the dots. So we've mentioned Azure quite a bit. So that to me screams something around the subscription. I'm trying to think this through here, but what special things do I need to do with my Azure subscription to make things work now that I understand better the cloud on the cloud thing?
Right. So, I think that when you look at your Citrix environment and deploying it out from Citrix Cloud, and you think about what do I need to prep for Azure, what do I need to do with my subscription or my tenant, our same principles for Azure apply. So we look at our 5, management components that we have to make sure in place. Our governance, we have to make sure that we have role-based access control in place. Our identity, so Azure Active Directory is going to be a requirement. And then we look at our operations, so deploying our solutions. So, we're going to start with an image inside of Citrix Cloud with our machine creation service to build out how our applications are going to be hosted on our VMs, but we need that core VHD image, right? So the image management and the resource layer of Azure, we're deploying out through ARM, those resources. The security component of it, right? So our auditing and our logging, our network security groups to make sure the activity that's going on in the network is appropriately allocated. And then, so that's the picture that we paint inside of our subscription in Azure. We have this Citrix Cloud Connector that's going to be this gateway back to the Citrix Cloud, and it still needs authentication, right? And as we deploy more resources from the Citrix Cloud into our Citrix tenants, we have to make sure that authentication plane is in place through Azure Active Directory and our role-based access control, so that we can build on top of that integrations into things like NetScaler and many areas like that.
Gotcha. And that was me dropping something into the IM Windows.
Okay. Yeah. So that Citrix Cloud Connector that we have deployed, it handles authentication, it handles a proxy for deploying out the Windows 10 images and the provisioning. And so, those are the core tenets, core building blocks, right? Virtual machines, authentication, networking, our connectivity that we want to think about inside of our Azure subscription to go in hand with Citrix Cloud.
Okay.
And Jeff, a couple of things to add to that as well. And I know mentioned Azure AD and utilizing some of the capabilities and security of Azure for some of the authentication. One of the great things about Citrix Cloud is also some of the flexibility when it comes to that authentication, especially since we're separating that management plane from your workloads and your workloads and your data. If you have a customer that is still leveraging, for instance, on-premise storefront or NetScaler's on-premise, they can leverage Citrix Cloud. Even though we have cloud-based versions of NetScaler and storefront within the platform, you can leverage your on-premise and your existing access plane today and still utilize Azure workloads with the abilities of Citrix Cloud. So that's one of the great things about really that separation of separating your workloads and data and IP from that management plane.
Okay.
And one of the things with the subscription as well that I wanted to highlight, and Jeff did a great job of summarizing, is when customers approach subscriptions from a Citrix standpoint, especially large larger customers, it really is like think of it as the encapsulation of those resources that are going to be running for the use cases you're delivering with Citrix. As customers start approaching, especially if they're net new in Azure and they're starting to put down that governance model, it really makes sense from a Citrix approach, especially if they're going to have a large footprint, to give them the most flexibility to drive towards a dedicated subscription for Citrix. So that way, when they need to pull on new resources, when they need to establish governance models for those resources within their Citrix workloads, they have the most flexibility. They're not going to be butting heads with other departments looking for additional cores. We need to pull up or hit in some subscription limits where we have to work through this billing differences because we have different departments pulling from the same subscription. So that's really what we tend to recommend to customers when they're looking towards Azure, to really, if they can within their cloud governance model, look towards having a separate subscription for Citrix. And that's one of the great things about Azure as well, is the ability to really divvy out subscriptions among different departments, all within one account for that organization.
Okay. There is a couple questions in the IM window here. If we could just take a quick pause and look at them.
Perfect. So, Vishal, I really miss MCS or PVS, the Citrix provisioning part, and I do not see it in Citrix Cloud. Why is PVS not possible in Azure? So first piece, we do use MCS within Azure, so that's something where we actually developed with Microsoft utilizing the Azure APIs, an automation engine of MCS utilizing Azure, and the way you do that is you actually create a service principal that you connect with your subscription. This can be something where you have full levels of automation, and you're going to give it a subscription scope service principal with contributor rights, and it can really operate effectively. To I need to get very granular with role-based access control to control that provisioning. One of the reasons PVS isn't available within Azure is just some of the different networking constraints, not being able to, PXE boot, things along those lines that are, key requirements to PVS. But there are ways to operate and have that single image management and rollback capability, and that's done through the updated machine creation services we've made specifically for Azure.
I'll take Wong's question here. Is an EA still required to deploy XenDesktop Essentials? The one thing that we definitely want to emphasize from this question, as well as to the group, is that if you go inside of the marketplace in Azure, whether you're a partner or whether you're a customer, you're going to see a lot of items in the marketplace that are made available to you. In the licensing mode or licensing model, in some cases depends upon whether or not you are the end customer who's provisioning the service, or whether or not you are a partner who's provisioning for an end customer. And as well, it depends on whether you're going to be managing the services. So if you have an EA as a customer, you can go in and you can provision XenDesktop Essentials. If you're going to do that under CSP, you can also do that under CSP, XenDesktop, or not XenDesktop, sorry, XenApp. So XenDesktop Essentials, right, still requires that EA. What I will say, though, is that there's also a CSP program with Citrix, and you should definitely work with Citrix and the CSP team at Citrix, because there are two CSP teams. We've got Microsoft CSP, and then we have Citrix CSP. Definitely work with the CSP team at Citrix if you're managing an environment for a customer, because the licensing that's required there for Microsoft as well as Citrix is very well understood and laid out in the cost plan. When it comes to consulting or doing a service for a customer, the customer ultimately owns or ends that subscription and the licenses. Then there's a little bit more flexibility. So still, an EA is required for XenDesktop and Essentials to the question, but just some added context around that question.
Interesting. And Jeff, you started alluding to this, and it sort of ties into the question that just popped into the IM window, but I counted 21 different Citrix apps in the marketplace.
Yeah.
How is this different than doing XenDesktop and/or XenApp Essentials? You started to, give us a little bit of information, but can you go a little bit deeper in that? And then I want to get into CSP as well.
Sure. So, XenApp, XenDesktop, where are good utilizations for those when we're looking at provisioning those for users? I think XenApp, I tend to think of as being session-based, and XenDesktop for full VDI. for a single desktop. And we know, like with Azure right now, if you're going to get a dedicated desktop, you have to do that in two ways. So you're either going to do a Windows Server 2016 desktop experience, or you're going to do a single Windows 10 Enterprise instance, and you can host one user on that single Windows 10 Enterprise instance, or you can do multi users on the Windows Server 2016 desktop experience. So decision trees. Where do we break these decision trees? I think we start to think about, when does session app not work in our model, what's compatible with our applications, versus when we can handle an application in multi-sessions on the desktop. Is there anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
Yes, definitely. And that's a great point that Jeff mentioned. Sometimes there's a lot of different desktops, and for organizations, it's not always one size fits all for their end users. So when you look at the Essentials offerings, think of it as, a XenApp, I'm just going to get that published application. I'm going to push out applications from a XenApp Essentials standpoint if you're using that offering from the marketplace. From a XenDesktop Essentials standpoint, I'm Win10 Desktop. That's the only use case that I'm going to provide in this circumstance. Okay. Now, from the full service, when it comes to utilizing the full XenApp XenDesktop service in Citrix Cloud, that's where you have greater flexibility in terms of creating a desktop that makes the most sense for different use cases within an organization. I'm going to create a delivery group for, this set of end users for Win10. I'm going to create another delivery group of users for, server-based desktops of 2016, all wrapped up into the same service. Another piece as well between Essentials that's different from the full service is that, like, the full service itself, you can have more of that hybrid cloud. So when you're looking at customers that are migrating towards Azure, like I have a handful of customers that are doing it today, some applications may have, a longer time that they're going to exist in the data center. So the full service, you can actually then set up connectors within their data center and then manage the same resources, on-premise and in Azure within one consolidated set of management. So that's not available in Essentials. Essentials has the, I see another question from Vishal. Do we have a fully functional storefront? So the Essentials service, you have the cloud-based storefront and the cloud-based versions of NetScaler as well. For the full XenApp XenDesktop service, that does also give you the more flexibility. So you actually need to leverage that storefront, that cloud-based access plane when it comes to the Essentials service, whereas the full service, if you do have someone that's made an investment in on-premise NetScaler, or they already have a storefront deployed because they're using 6.5, you can aggregate your cloud-based XenApp XenDesktop service with that existing environment as they're migrating to cloud-based workloads in Azure. So as you work with customers, especially if they're an existing Citrix customer, moving them towards like the full service probably makes the most sense, because it then gives them a smooth roadmap as they start moving workloads towards Azure. Someone net new, maybe it's a small business, you're working with a customer, maybe like a law firm, 50 users, they're all going to be a VDI desktop in Azure. Let's deploy this out for them and help them architect it. Essentials might make sense there. So taking the approach based on the different types of use cases and then just being aware of those capabilities is definitely the first step.
And we'll have like an easy decision tree framework. Is when you're trying to think about, do you need the full XenApp XenDesktop service, or can you go with Essentials? And if the answer is yes to any of these 5 questions, then you need the full service. So the first question is, do you need to leverage existing Citrix licensing using the trade-up program? Okay, then you need the full service. Do you need the ability to deploy workloads on-premise and to other clouds? Are you looking for Citrix negotiated discounts? Do you require app layering? Do you require Linux VDA? Those 5 questions can help you really quickly go, okay, Essentials isn't going to work. I need the full service.
Exactly. Thank you, Jeff. Then we have another question. Is there any kind of web portal we can use to monitor users logging date, time, and location from Cal? Now, from a Citrix standpoint, that's what we'd like to call Citrix Director. This is something that's part of the full service as well as the Essentials. Of course, the full service has a more robust set of features, but that's included as part of that management plane that is Citrix Cloud. So as an admin, I can access and see, what users are connecting from what set of locations, how often, what's the date and time, am I seeing the consumption of this, what type of consumption am I seeing from the different apps that I'm pushing out. I need a support desk to just go in and verify and see how the session is performing from a what is the user using? Is something stalled? Is the machine not registered with the overall service? So there are troubleshooting tools that are included as part of Citrix Cloud, and that's something that you don't need to maintain a separate management server like you would with the traditional version of the product. It is included and managed by Citrix.
Okay. Cal asks, is there any kind of integration between Citrix XenApp Essentials and Azure Single Sign-On that allows me to publish web app as single sign-on apps?
So with Essentials, XenApp Essentials, and that's actually, like Jeff mentioned, that checklist. What's those yes or no questions of, does it make sense to look towards the full service versus Essentials? Essentials is, exactly how it sounds. Essentials. We're just going to publish, Windows-based IaaS apps utilizing Citrix from Azure. So I'm spinning up a set of, maybe D-series instances within my Azure Virtual Network. I need to install some thick apps on those machines, and I want to publish them via Citrix. That is the scope of Essentials. Looking towards publishing like Azure single sign-on based applications or web apps, you would need to leverage something such as the full service, and that's something where using combinations of NetScaler and some of our other technologies, you can drive that result for your customer.
Thanks, Kevin. Jeff, just to step back a bit, you mentioned app layering. What is that? What are the benefits? Help me understand that. I've not heard that before.
So I think app layering, especially with customers who are looking for migrations, and Kevin, that's going to be a follow-up for the migrations with images. It's a way to control your golden image process, not just with a bunch of applications and a static machine, but to separate out that image for your virtual machines with a platform layer, an application layer, and a user layer for the user data. And so what it allows you to do is get much more granular control. Instead of a golden image management, you have a user management platform for what type of operating system they need for their applications, what type of applications that they need, and then the last layer would be the user side of that, right? So think of situations where certain applications you might need Linux VDA versus Windows VDA, different platforms where you need to manage that, or maybe you're managing user profiles in different locations. And I'll let Kevin dive into that as far as this even plays into like better management of migrations, right, from on-premises.
Definitely, and so with the different layers, one of the great advantages, especially what Jeff mentioned with the migrations, is you're really taking an image and all the components of the image, and it's like breaking it out like a cake. You'd have like the vanilla on the top, like the chocolate in the middle, maybe strawberry in the bottom, and then each of those, sprinkle, yeah, or funfetti or things along those lines.
Everyone's hungry now.
Yeah, exactly. Lunch for me is after this meeting, if you can't tell. But so starting with the OS layer and by centralizing and just, hey, we're just going to have no domain join. Think of it as vanilla as it possibly can be, just like latest Windows updates. By splitting that out from things like the platform, your Azure agents, any sort of like Citrix agents that you're going to install on the VDA, like the VDA or like any other Citrix agents or monitoring agents. By splitting those pieces out, that platform is now flexible. I can create another platform layer. Say you're migrating from on-premises. I'm going to have a Hyper-V platform layer. I'm going to have my Azure layer that might have some of those Azure-based agents that you want to deploy in the public cloud. You don't need to update that OS for both of these images. So now what you've done is you've taken an operating system and you've now hybridized it by creating two separate platform layers. And then the same goes for all the applications. Since it's a separate layer that fits in your cake, I do click to run Office 365 in one layer. That's something that now I can push out, on-prem. I can manage that the same way as I'm managing in Azure. I update that once, and it's now being applied to both of those images when I push that out. So for a lot of customers that, again, are looking towards cloud and aggressively moving towards Azure, this is a way for them to hybridize and for them to centralize and, really scale up their image management by not having to update an operating system, multiple times across images, not having to update their Citrix agents, multiple times across images or apps, things along those lines.
You mentioned a key word, scaling. What guidance do you have on scaling this out?
Excellent. Great question, Jeff. So from an Azure like instance standpoint, and where we stand with regards to like, so let's start with like Citrix. Some of the Citrix components like the cloud connectors that you would need to use within your Azure subscription, as you have, as that key component that bridges your subscription into our cloud control plane. We typically recommend customers start with, like a D series instance, depending on your region. A D2 V2 would be a good place to start, or like a D4 or D2 V3 if that's available within your region. Again, since it's an infrastructure piece and you want better performing, more consistent, storage, we definitely recommend customers look at premium storage for that set of infrastructure. So that's from as an infrastructure piece. What I'm going to be using as that sole piece of infrastructure that connects into Citrix Cloud. The next piece is the workloads, VDI, or for instance some of my XenApp workloads. Starting with the D series is typically something we recommend for customers. We've actually done a series of scalability testing in-house with Login VSI, leveraging A series, D series VMs. And we found that the D2 V2 series of VMs provides the best dollar per user per hour utilizing those Login VSI testing. So if you're doing anything from like a XenApp based workload and you just want a place to start, definitely start there. And then the great capabilities of Azure, you can change those workloads dynamically as you start to continue along the project. Especially a lot of these, a lot of customers, they might have tight deadlines. The CTOs like, we need to get to the cloud today. So you don't need to spend all this time, like you would on-prem, going through these very extensive sizing exercises to make like a capital expense. Really use that flexibility of Azure to your advantage. Start with that size, scale up accordingly. And then VDI, we typically see D series, and then some cases F series instances.
Okay, so I'm a partner. How do I get started? Is there certification? Is there training? Is there something you recommend I attend? What's the plan there?
So we actually worked with Microsoft to develop a course from our education team. It's pretty much using Citrix Cloud on Azure. So that course is available and can be taken. It's instructor-led. It's a 5-day course, and it gives you really a deep dive on building, deploying, managing key Azure principles you need to know. So it's pretty much that soup to nuts. If you were to come in with no Citrix or Azure experience, you could walk out of that class having a solid foundation to start delivering this as a service and managing this for your customers. And that'd be a great place to start. And I'll post a link in the chat in just a second.
Great. There is a question here from Vishal. Bring your own license for Citrix. How to push these old customers to adopt cloud with complex SAP kind of app configurations. Any comments or feedback on that?
Yeah, I think a common approach that I've taken working with customers is to say, okay, how can we dip the toe in the water? How can we try something, right? And so utilizing Citrix Cloud, we want to try to find a secondary resource location and see what low-lying fruit in the application catalog we have that we can move and host in a resource location that's in Azure. So we're just trying to convince them to, throw a test and development environment. It's called an extended infrastructure, and host a new resource location in Azure and move some apps over there that are easy, and we'll go after the complex ones once we have the easy workloads under there. We build the confidence, and then there's a maturity, a natural maturity that comes to the customer journey of approaching it in that way.
Interesting. Very good. Another question here from Kenny. I assume Xen Desktop Essentials, the Azure VMs for each virtual desktop are separate additional costs in addition to the Essential subscription cost. What about XenApp Essentials?
So there are two. So pretty much with XenApp and Desktop Essentials are billed direct to your Azure subscription. The full service, it's something you need to work with through Citrix, and you'd be like a separate licensing acquisition, but it is a separate cost. So the cost of that IaaS that you're running within your Azure subscription is a separate cost from the licensing of the overall Citrix technology. Now, we do have a capability known as Citrix Smart Scale, where we can actually help you manage some of those infrastructure costs from like a scheduling as well as load-based standpoint. So for instance, if you have a series of application-based workloads, you want to make sure that, hey, I want 10% of my capacity on at the weekends. I want to have 50%, during the workday, and then I want to scale up based on load as people start to come in and log on. Citrix Smart Scale will actually, you can establish those parameters within the context of your Citrix workloads, and it can then start scaling up, scaling down based on that consumption. So that way you can effectively use your resources. You don't over provision, you don't under provision. You can really set something up based on the time and needs of your business or your customer's business.
Interesting. So I'm hearing a lot of upside potential here. Can either or both of you give me any idea of, what's the market for this out there? As a partner, why should I invest in doing this? What's in it for me? What's your insight there?
I think from the partner point of view, right? Microsoft has lined up tons of incentives for our Gold Platform partners. So we have the Azure Study Community Group to help you get your certifications on Azure, which helps the partner that you work at develop their competency, right? And then that competency unlocks incentives. So there are margins that you're going to make and making money hosting your resource locations on Azure. But as you get your competencies, as you train, you'll have more opportunities for those incentives to grow. When I look at the Citrix side of it, and the big announcement by Greg Stillwell was they're incentivizing the Citrix Cloud with resource locations that are in the cloud. So these percentage points of incentive that you get just multiply as you're deploying in that model. So I think what is the opportunity in the market is that we find ourselves needing partners. We find ourselves needing competency partners with competencies to drive these efforts, right? And we just get tons of requests for this coming our way. So customers are hungry to figure out what VDI is on top of Azure, and they're looking to that leadership that Citrix has to be able to get the efficiencies that cloud has. And there's a really easy way to go and just throw some resources up into Azure, but what happens is that consumption price tag comes at the end of the day, and if you're not doing it using the tools appropriately, we talked about the Citrix Smart Tools and Smart Scale, but even the management layer of it appropriately, you're going to have a bad time with the costs that come with it, because you're not thinking about fully utilizing your resources, your applications, and your underlying virtual infrastructure.
Okay. Kevin, do you want to?
That's my 2 cents.
I'll take it. Kevin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and as part of that as well, especially from the Citrix side, and when you look at the context of how CSPs operate today with some of the traditional product versus Citrix Cloud, by shifting some of that management of that infrastructure onto the vendor, it really gives you as a service provider more time to really focus on that bread and butter of your customer, that workload, that data, really making sure they have an optimal user experience. So you can leverage that Citrix Cloud as that platform for your organization to then manage different tenants within your customer base, and setting them up in different groups, and then focusing more on really what's driving their business instead of having to maintain databases and all the standard costs of operating the technology in a traditional sense. So we're really trying to drive a lot of flexibility and analytics for those partners, for service providers, for partners, for customers through this management plane. So it's not just, hey, I can operate apps and desktops. Mm-hmm. It's really also aggregating, that data, where especially, some of the announcements that, like Jeff mentioned, our summit kickoff at Synergy last year, we're really trying to set up like what's known as, a secure perimeter around that end user, where you can really eventually see from Citrix Cloud, I can see, if there's any risk behavior in terms of, a new user's log on. So you can, as a service provider, you can operate and see this data, and you can inform your tenant that, hey, someone's account might have been compromised, because I've seen that they've failed 3 times. They're logging in from Russia and they're trying to download a ton of files. So that's really where we're driving that platform, is really so as a partner, as a service provider, you can provide that business level value instead of really the monotony of just systems management. I need to run, some patches on servers. I need to update databases. I need to bring this platform to the next version and go through a migration cycle. So just to kind of give, a little more of the technology pieces to it.
Sure. I see Daniel's. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's always the Russians, isn't it? They're the ones who always want to get into our computers.
I just saw Daniel's question about CSP model in Zen Desktop and Zen Essentials. So Daniel, to answer your question, Zen Desktop is not available in CSP. There is a model that allows you to get Zen Desktop and CSP if it's bring your own license, but that's for an end customer, and you should definitely talk to your Citrix channel person, right? Whoever your partner is. And on the Citrix side, there's someone who will help you with that account. Talk to them. They know the CSP program with Citrix. They know the CSP program with Microsoft, and they know how to steer those waters. So definitely check with them on that. But as of right now, Zen Desktop is not available in the CSP program. We want to get that voice out there so we don't cause any kind of confusion. Zen app is.
Great, thank you. What other questions do we have from the audience? Either drop them into the IM window or feel free to come off mute and ask them directly. While we're waiting for that, Jeff and Kevin, give us your final thoughts. What are the key things you want our audience to know about the Citrix Cloud on Azure?
Jeff, you want to kick it off, or
yeah, I'll go ahead. So the final thoughts, I think that I'd want someone to know who's looking at Citrix on Azure is that we have found in model of DevOps as well as in the model of software as a service that these management platforms, things like Office 365 that are hugely successful, they push the limits of our technology. They allow us to really deliver business value. So when I look at Citrix Cloud and the future of Citrix Cloud, it's really promising. And for our Microsoft partners who are out there who are also Citrix partners, now is the time to find those cloud opportunities and have those cloud discussions, looking for either extending an on-premise customer who currently uses Citrix on-premise, extending that as a resource location in Azure, just going with a greenfield deployment with Citrix Cloud in Azure as your resource location. I want to say now is the time, right, to do that. And we have tons of technical resources available to help you do that, as well as ARM templates, infrastructure as a code to go along with your deployment process for your solutions.
Excellent. And then from like a Citrix Cloud piece as well, especially as your customers are looking to cloud, customers are looking to start shifting, and they want to focus again, like I mentioned, on business value rather than the monotony of just systems management, that day-to-day of having to rack servers and set up and update databases and software. They really want to drive value. And from what I've seen from customers that exist with Citrix today, or their net new Citrix, utilizing Citrix Cloud and Azure in combination is really driving a lot of value and just big projects for some of these large enterprises in much tighter time frames. I think, to me, one of the biggest wow moments since I've really began this cloud journey of working with my Azure colleagues at Microsoft and working within Citrix. I mean, there's been scenarios where customers have, hey, we need to instead of doing a data center in Central, we're going to do Azure East, and we're going to do Azure East. We're going to change our cloud strategy of just the location we're going to pick, and then we spun up all these servers within a day. So like thinking back, a couple years ago, if a customer's like, hey, we need to move data centers, you're talking in like several year project. And we were doing this with Citrix Cloud in like a day or two, setting up a new virtual network, a new VPN connection. So it's just really amazing what we're doing with this technology. And as a partner, I saw one question before, why invest in Zen Apps Zen Desktop when customers are moving towards web apps? As people pivoted to mobility, the same question abounded. Like, hey, everyone's doing mobile apps now. What about Zen Apps Zen Desktop? Same with web apps. It's really the workspace. And Citrix Cloud, I know we focused a lot on the Zen Apps Zen Desktop piece during this conversation. Citrix Cloud is really pulling in the workspace. It's pulling in the data. It's pulling in mobility. And through the workspace service is the service that we highlighted at Synergy and is continuing to develop and is available now. Web apps are going to be part of that conversation as well, and we're doing that with Unified Gateway with NetScaler today in our standard traditional products. So from a partner standpoint, you don't want to go in and say, hey, I'm just the web app. I'm only doing web apps today. I can get end to end. Let's talk data. Let's talk your mobile devices. Let's talk your traditional apps and desktops. Your 3D graphics apps are going to need those N series VMs and those dedicated GPUs to get going. Let's sit down and put down a full end-to-end solution for your end users, so we can have a use case that's going to really drive a lot of value for your business and take you to the next level compared to some of your competitors. So
Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with the blog. We talked about how cloud is a model, right? We look at things like Azure Stack, and we look at how we take our Azure model of cloud scalability, resiliency, and we put that in Azure Stack. And I think the same thing is become true and live today with Workspaces on Citrix, is that now Workspaces has become a model, right? And so we have a place to deploy our Workspaces on-prem, we have a place to do it in the cloud, and so now our Workspaces are a model of delivery, right, of management of data and applications.
I like that. I like that. One last question here I see in the IM window from Vishal.
So from Vishal, if we pull the image with ASR and deploy with MCS on Citrix Cloud, should there be any other charges of license for the client from Citrix, Rest Compute, NetScaler, storage costs on Azure? So from the Citrix standpoint, yeah, utilizing if you need to deploy an image with that MCS standpoint, other than, you'll have to consider the Azure costs associated with that. Citrix, we're not priced per image, we're priced per user. So for instance, how many users are going to be consuming this use case is something that you need to consider, as well as any application-based licensing. So for instance, within that, instance that you're pushing out, if you're using any third-party technologies or third-party apps that are within that image that require licensing, that's something that would also need to be part of your overall cost model as you're putting together a service or working with a customer on a specific design project.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So I can, in other words, load a bunch of images. That really doesn't matter because I'm going to pay for the seat count people using it, correct?
Yes. Citrix is at a user level.
Great. Okay. All right. Any final questions from the audience before we wrap today's call up? All right, Kevin, Jeff, any final words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom, nuggets of truth, anything like that?
Yeah, we definitely need to talk about the tips. We need to talk about tips, Kevin, right?
Definitely. And as a final thought, Jeff and I are actually going to be doing another webinar together on the Citrix side. We have a series of webinars with our consulting team, working with a series of experts, internally through our consulting within Citrix. And the next webinar is going to be based on Citrix and Azure design principles, going through just some of the lessons learned we've seen as vendors working with some of the larger customers in the field, deploying these projects for their businesses. Definitely recommend everyone attend. It's the registration link is open. It is on February 1st. I've posted that link within the chat. And there were some questions as well about cost calculators, and you're looking at planning. I've also posted a link for our Citrix on Azure cost calculator. So if you need to work with a customer to try to gauge, what's the projected Azure spend that we're going to have for their Citrix workloads, this is a calculator we work together with Microsoft to put together, and you can do that. So Jeff and I are going to be walking through the process, kind of go through some battle stories of things we've seen in the field, as well as walk through key architecture principles and what's the process I need to think about when I approach this problem with a customer. So definitely recommend everyone attend on February 1st.
It's going to be a big knowledge transfer and mind share that's going on there, and for our Microsoft partners who are looking at Citrix, developing your practice or opportunities that you have, talk to your Microsoft account managers, your partner development managers, your partner technical strategists that are there to help you. We've got resources, we've got tools to help you with this.
Great. Sounds like an incredible product. There's lots of opportunity out there, lots of support from both companies to help a partner get started. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining our call today. Kevin, did you have a last word?
No, just thank you, Jeff and Jeff, for having me. This is great. And thanks, everyone, for the fun and interesting questions. This hour flew by. We probably could have gone for another hour.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We're going to post this to our YouTube channel later today. So once again, Kevin, Jeff, thanks for being here. Appreciate all of our participants for sticking through to the end. Have yourself a great weekend. We'll see you in a month. And take care, everyone. Safe journeys to all. Bye-bye.